Today we are meeting with Beau Babka and talking a little bit about what parents do right and what they often do wrong when they think of involving law enforcement in divorce or child custody situations. So thank you for being here. And before we launch into some of the typical situations, can you just tell us briefly kind of the breadth of your experience in that area? I mean, I know you've been in law enforcement a long time, but specifically, what kind of experience have you had just dealing with disgruntled parents and spouses and things like that?
Well, first I come from a divorced family, a very abusive father, and so early on in my career, I understood the situations, the dynamics between men and women and relationships and things like that. And so that started early in my career, obviously as a patrol officer. Spent a lot of time dealing with domestic violence situations, same-sex partnerships as well. I mean, there were just as many of those, or very similar to those situations. So I spent 20 years in law enforcement. I also spent about 19 years as a college instructor. So did a lot of training, did a lot of mentoring, did a lot of counseling with police officers that were going through domestic violence situations themselves, or may have. So I have a lot of I guess a lot of understanding or knowledge in that way, and in no way am I the guru, but I do understand and understand how police officers should be reacting in those situations. I know how emotions become a huge part of it, even for a police officer sometimes.
So let's talk about a couple of scenarios that I often encounter, and it's usually, occasionally I've been present personally, but usually it's on the phone, and it's something like, I've got an ex or a separated spouse, and I have a court order, and I'm supposed to pick up the kids tonight at 7 p.m. or something like that, and I've been told don't bother. And we haven't spoken, we haven't scripted this, so
Right.
What would you, with your law enforcement background, do if you were in that situation saying, I'm to pick up the children, I know that I'm right. It's not a matter of I think I'm right or I feel I should be right, but I know that it's my weekend, I have the order in front of me, and I'm getting resistance from my ex. What do you do next?
Well, I know that in many situations, my counsel was always have a standby with police. Have a standby, keep the peace. If you had a regularly scheduled area to pick up, then go to that area and make sure that there's somebody there if you feel there's going to be some type of issue. But follow through, go through with the process. If the process gets to a critical stage, then there might need to be some action on law enforcement's part.
Well, let me break it down a little bit.
Or if the dynamics become, well, go ahead. Go ahead, break it down a little bit.
The first thing that I like as a lawyer, as I hear this, is call them and ask the law enforcement officer to stand by at the park or the restaurant or the gas station where you're showing up. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, if I show up on time and then my spouse does not, the police are not going to issue a citation necessarily, but they might prepare an incident report to say,
most definitely,
this parent showed up at the McDonald's with a copy of his order in hand, and he got here at 6:55, and he waited, and we were here, and we saw him. It's like he was here, and he was on time. And then he brought with him a copy of what he said was his court order. I don't know if it was or not, right? The police can't know that.
No.
So if you see something like that on on a police report, know that the officer is simply doing what he has to. I don't know if this is a real order or not. I don't know if this order has been replaced with something else or not. But I write down, he showed me what was an order that said, meet at this McDonald's in Draper or South Jordan or Bountiful, whatever it was, and we were in fact there. He was on time, and then I was present when he dialed a number. He said it was his wife's or his girlfriend's, and it rang and rang, or she picked up and said, go to hell. I saw him send a text if he does, and that will be in there, and correct me if I'm wrong. That's something useful because now you've got someone with no dog in the fight making
Exactly.
a report for your benefit.
And there's documentation. So you can use that as a lawyer, you can use that as the person that's involved in it to go forth in whatever appropriate procedure, obviously court problems or whatever it is. So yes, that is,
Okay.
police are there to not officiate, if you will, or point blame. They're there to, in a way, to mitigate and just to make sure that everyone's safe, everyone is supposed to be taken care of, everyone's healthy. Let's
That's
move
right.
on. Let's not, not to get involved in he said, she said. But if documentation, if it's presented and it doesn't look like it's been penned on a notebook, police officers will usually
Right.
take that word and they should document it.
Now, candidly speaking, do police really hate responding to these kind of standby situations? Do they feel like it's a waste of their time, or that it's like, look, I'm supposed to be out there protecting people from crime, not kind of playing nanny to parents that won't cooperate?
I think the mature, seasoned, professional officer understands the situation.
Do they still think? I mean, even if they
No.
behave,
I think some
in,
do.
in a dignified way, do they still kind of like, I can't believe I have to come to another one of these?
No, I
people?"
think some. I think some may. Some your Dirty Harry type. Your types that are all into I'm going to go fight crime. But again, we look at what is crime. What are the roots of crime? What are the roots of what's going on? Problem solving is your job as a police officer, and so
Okay.
therefore, I'm sure there's a day where they've just been. They've had quite a day, and all of a sudden, hey, go stand by, keep the peace somewhere.
Okay.
They're going, oh my goodness. Well, okay, that's fine, but there's nothing better than they're usually if they've dealt with this couple or this group, people before, they're going to want to make sure it comes to a smooth conclusion, at least for that time. And so I don't think that I think you may get that, but I think for the most part, if you get someone that's seasoned, man or woman, officer, they understand those situations.
I actually recently had an incident of custodial interference, and I called it in. I haven't had to call for years, and a big part of that is I just refused to go there because I've been trying to keep peace. But I needed to report this, just if nothing else, just to get a report. And I actually asked the officer if he'd been divorced. I was like, can I ask you a personal question you don't have to answer? Have you been divorced? And he told me, yeah, I've been through it. I've been there. I understand it all. I was like, great. Not that you've gone through that. Sorry about the misfortune there. I wish that upon no one, but I'm glad you understand. And he gave me a report. He was very nice. It was actually, I think it was unified. So it was pretty.
And Brian makes a good point. If you think that you can ask something like that, it's just good human nature, good PR to try to establish some rapport.
Yeah.
I mean, some officers might feel like they're being played, and if you get that impression,
Right.
back off and just say, okay, it was worth a shot, but now I guess this person's going to be all business, or maybe thinks that I'm trying to suck up and it's not working.
Right.
Let's move on then. So a different scenario where someone is calling up and saying, I don't know if my children are safe. I was driving by the house and I saw silhouettes that looked like they were fighting, or I drove by and I saw what looked like a wild party, or when I went to drop the kids off, I thought I saw someone stumbling around intoxicated, or I thought I smelled marijuana, all that sort of thing, or I heard my son or daughter just wailing like a banshee. First of all, some people know what to do, but other people don't. So what could somebody do when it comes to asking for law enforcement help, if anything, if it's not their parent time, but they're afraid for their kids?
Well, what you've just talked about, I mean, if there's underage drinking, or there's alcohol, or there's drugs, or there's fighting, there's something that might alarm somebody to the sense that there might be physical harm going on there. In all of what you talked about, there's nothing wrong with a person calling law enforcement and having them do a check of the residence.
What's that called, by the way, in official parlance?
We usually call it check of the residence or welfare check. A lot of times it's been called the welfare check, and if it's explained right to the dispatcher, they'll say that somebody, and it can be done anonymously as well. I mean, a lot of times they'll go out anonymously and not, but for the sake of the safety of the children or things like that. There's going to be a history on the house as well that the officers will be pulling up or the dispatcher will be pulling up. If there's a history of, whatever going on, then that will alert them a little bit more and help them to understand what's going on. But to your point, there's nothing wrong with someone making that call. Those are your children. It is a different dynamic now, or has been for a while, and if you're worried about them, that's okay too.
When people cry wolf, and I know you've had this experience because I've seen it myself, where somebody's calling in welfare checks every other day. What, can that boomerang on people, or is there basically no risk?
Sure, I'll put my police administrator hat on now, and that's basically the issue there is that law enforcement will evaluate, that situation. If the system is being manipulated to the point where it's causing, officer time, police time, people time, then those calls will go. They won't go unanswered, but they won't be the vigor of, law enforcement getting out there to check that will not be, not be as much as.
Can you be cited for calling in a bunch of
sure.
BS
Yeah,
calls?
there's abuse, 911 abuse or dispatch abuse or something like that. Yes.
Okay.
Sure, you can. Definitely.
I was just gonna add. I think it's fair to say that a lot of times when you're calling in for a welfare check and stuff like that, if the department is literally responding to fire and possible gunshot, and, they aren't going to be able to just immediately show up. You might need to have a lunch ready, be patient, don't take out your problems on the police. It's not their problem.
Right.
And be respectful, because they do have a job that sometimes is very hard because they're dealing with.
It's going to depend,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you're bringing up. It's going to depend on a priority. I mean, depending on the agency, throughout Utah or wherever it is. If it's a very busy agency, then they may not be able to get to the check for an hour or an hour and a half. If it's a different scenario, if you're calling in, making false accusations, obviously the situation can become. The officers can screen that with the city attorney and file a charge against the person that's
Let me
calling
ask
a
the
lot.
next question then. So you get, and this is the hypothetical parent. I'm at my wit's end. I've been putting up with a lot of flack for a long time. And I get to the house or to the park or the McDonald's parking lot, and I just get angry. I'm not committing any crimes at this point, but then my ex calls the police on me, and there's plenty of people that know what I'm talking about here. My ex is gleefully calling the cops about this because she wants or he wants the police to come and either make a report and, if it's a really good day, an arrest. So what can you do? What would your advice be to people that are really angry and justifiably angry?
Sure.
To avoid getting tangled up with the police and having what should be just venting or blowing off steam turn into, now I look like the ass who has not only who really was getting jerked around, but now it's all turned around on me. I look bad, and I either got carted off in handcuffs or cited for something. What are the things you see people doing that you can tell it's like, these are not bad people, but they've gone too far?
Backing up to kind of preparatory
Anyway,
before that happens,
right.
I think that, we always talk about the buddy system in different ways, but I think the buddy system, if you have a family member or maybe someone that's neutral, you obviously have cell phones, we have ways of videotaping. I think documenting your demeanor prior to that meeting and actually at that meeting, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having a buddy or having an intermediary there to really show what's going on. And if the other person, let's say the other person that's calling, basically false calling in and saying you're acting, way weird, it's always nice to be able to document something like that. And there's nothing that says you can't have other people with you. Obviously you don't want it. There might be there's some emotions going on, but if it's a good friend, if it's someone that can go and be a witness as to what is transpiring, there's phones to document that as well. The officers are showing up with their cameras rolling. There's no reason why a citizen couldn't come in with someone else with cameras rolling just to prove that, hey, I'm not the aggressor here. yes, I'm angry, I'm emotional, this is difficult, but I haven't done anything,
Yeah,
and
but-
here's the proof.
But when you're told when the call was made that I'm pushing and shoving and threatening or wielding a weapon,
An axe,
yeah, I was gonna say an axe.
yes.
They can say, well, I didn't, and that, like you say, I can play this recording back or this video back, all right. But I'm at my wit's end. I feel the police haven't been helpful, and I've been calling for months, and I'm tired of. I've missed my child's birthday, and I wasn't told about the school play, and I'm clearly distraught. And I get in the officer's face, and I tell them they're full of shit, and I do all kinds of stuff. What is it that can happen to somebody? And I'm not saying like how far can you take it? I'm not asking that. But what I am asking is, what should people be worried about? What kind of crimes can people commit and not even realize it when they're in those situations for an exchange or a pickup or something like that?
Well, they can commit, I've seen situations where someone will start banging on a car or, breaking property, or hitting a door, or, you're talking, criminal mischief there.
Okay.
When you get into, now they call it terroristic threats, but it's basically the old common law assault and battery, where the assault was typically the physical part, the battery was the physical part, the assault was verbal, and so they can get in trouble for verbal assault as well, because it might be threatening behavior. I'm gonna do this to you, or I'm gonna do that, some specific things. So stay away from the very specifics. Sure. I'm going to break your legs, or I'm going to hurt you bad, or I'm so upset I'm going to trash your car, or those kinds of things.
What about this? Like,
be careful about
if the
that.
police are coming and I feel like they're not being fair. And again, it could be that I'm so emotionally upset that my judgment is bad. Can I just yell and scream at the police and tell them they're full of shit? Can I get angry and tell them, it's like, I want your badge, and I want your sergeant to be down here, and I'm going to see to it, and I'm going to do this, like, and you can't touch me, and I've got rights, I'm standing on a public sidewalk. You know what I mean? What are the kinds of things that people think, see on TV, or read on blogs, that is like, in Utah at least, it's like, hey, you know what? If you do this in Utah, and I want to arrest you, I can, or cite you. What are some of those things?
It's going to depend on the officer. It's going to depend on that
Sure.
shift. It's going to depend on the supervisor, because I've seen just wonderful display. I call them wonderful displays of mature, calm police work.
Yeah, I'm not blaming the officer.
Yeah, no. What I'm saying is where an officer will take that. Will say, sure, I know you feel, and then I've seen other officers that will jump to a conclusion like that's an attack upon them and not understand the situation. And that's where the arrest would come in. That's where, they're in handcuffs and they're in the back of the car because they got flailing arms and things like that. They may not have physically tried to do anything, but it's really going to, unfortunately, policing is a human, it's a human business, and you may get a different reaction from one and a dissimilar one from another officer, depending on who it is. But your behavior, I think if you were to preface it with, I am angry. I'm not angry at you, officer. I am angry at this situation. I'm frustrated. I'm venting. I'm this, I'm that. Don't tell the officer, yes, this is a public street and I pay your taxes and I do this. Just
Exactly.
just
That's
communicate to
what I'm
them. And I know it's hard when your emotions are so high, but most will understand that this is a very unfortunate situation. You might be frustrated. You maybe haven't seen your kids in months, or you haven't had the opportunity to vent to an attorney or to the court or to anybody. And so I think the best is to preface whatever you're going to do or say with, I'm venting. You, officer, please understand, these are my frustrations. Because I think, they will allow that. Some of my best officers that I ever had were, most amazing thing was to watch them on videotape and watch them and see how calm they were as people in these situations would just vent, and they'd scream and yell and turn around and twist and, you know, almost fall on the ground, cry, you know, yell, the whole thing. And they would just be there, say, I'm sorry this is happening. This is the only thing that we can do. I understand your situation. We can only do this. We can only enforce this. We can only talk to you about this. And so, anyway, I'm not trying to say that all police officers are that way.
Oh, yeah, no, in fact,
but I think that's...
I was asking, it was from the perspective of, you know, folks, just because you see people getting away with behaving badly in front of police officers does not mean that you can just lambaste the police if they're not doing your bidding. Now, you mentioned something about an enforcement into things, so I'd like to finish up with custodial interference, because it's a very common complaint by parents, and it's a crime in Utah. It's a beefed up crime in Utah, and a lot of people will tell you, I don't get a whole lot of help from police. I will call and say, I haven't seen my kids in weeks or months, like you said, and especially if it's like, look, you've been here before, we're almost on a first name basis, officer. Why won't you issue a citation? Now, I don't know the answer to this question. So whatever you'd feel comfortable discussing, I do know that when the law was passed, there were, I can't remember which one it was, but there was at least one sheriff that said publicly, we're not going to waste a lot of manpower on this. We've got better things to do. But I think the smarter thing to do if you don't want to enforce that law is not say anything and then just kind of string the public along. So this isn't an indictment.
No.
But
no.
What would be an honest man's, law-abiding citizen's best way to procure the cooperation of law enforcement when he is or she is a bona fide victim of custodial interference? Could you give us any insight as to how you would proceed, knowing with your experience in law enforcement, how should someone enlist the help of law enforcement to build a case for custodial interference, either as a crime that if someone gets arrested or cited for, or using law enforcement in its witness capacity? You mentioned an enforcement aspect of things, so let's talk about, in wrapping up, something that's been a hot topic for a few years, and that's custodial interference. Now, for those of you watching that don't know what it is, unfortunately, a lot of you soon will. For those of you that do know what it is, here's a frustration that I hear a lot. People will say, I know about the crime, I've looked it up, I've read it, hey, that's me. I've gone to pick up my kids, I'm on time, I've done everything I'm supposed to do, and nobody shows up. I'm either nobody shows up or I'm even told flat out, you don't get the kids. I call the police, they may respond, they may make a little incident report. I do it again and again, and then I finally say, hey, aren't you, he's right inside. You can hear him in there, or they're standing on the front lawn. Why won't you issue a citation? So what would your advice be to people that are saying, it seems like law enforcement doesn't want to help me or doesn't want to enforce this? What would be the best way for people who are honest to facilitate the help of law enforcement with custodial interference, whether it's as a crime, or if they're saying, well, I just want to use law enforcement in its capacity as a documenting reporting feature to maybe seek it on a civil basis or an order to show cause contempt of court basis?
Let's talk about first the dynamics of what the law has been passed. Now, remember that there's a couple of different, there's a few different, the dynamics are as such. Law enforcement in the field can obviously arrest or cite as it pertains to this law. Then the next step would be it goes to a city or a county prosecutor to screen the case, to actually follow through with the court proceeding, the process or due process or whatever else it is. And then above that city attorney is a mayor and a police chief and all these other people that are involved in this dynamic of domestic or custodial interference, whatever you want to call it, in that sense. So you've got all this dynamic, and if you find an agency or you have an agency that is that understands that it's their they need to enforce it when necessary and use it as a tool. If you don't have an organization that does that, then you're going to have some frustrations. If you have an organization that understands the law, that's going to see that it will benefit, it will solve the problem. I'm a community cop. Everything that I ever pushed as an administrator was, let's try and solve the problems before they occur. So in this custodial situation, or in any custodial situation, why would we not want to solve the issue? If there's some hostility going on, there's some just mere just I'm going to ignore the law types of things going on, why wouldn't we want to enforce that and later maybe or even prior to that come to some kind of hitting match or cars banging into each other or whatever it is. So I've never been able to understand that, and I'm editorializing a little bit.
But that's exactly
But
what.
the problem
is,
is that we need to solve the problem. Therefore, that's what the person needs to demand. The person needs to demand. The legislature passed the law. People need to. Attorneys understand it. City attorneys should. It's the law. Doesn't mean we use it all the time as police officers, but we use it as a tool to help us with solving problems before they happen. Now, kind of back to the rest of your question, I think that the issues are documentation and being calm enough. Obviously, it's an emotional situation. If they won't enforce it, then document it. And if you have 1 to even 2 situations where it's just blatantly, it's a custodial interference and no citations were given, then you can go to that city attorney. You can go to that prosecutor and say, look, this is the law. Why aren't you enforcing? Or you can hire an attorney to say, why aren't you taking care of this? These are the ramifications of what is happening right now, or this is what happened prior to this. Why won't you do this? It's the law. You realize you don't enforce laws all the time, but
for reasons
please,
that we may or may not understand.
Exactly. Please, and obviously politics. Politics play a big part in some of this. Some people don't think, in our society that this is an issue, and it's more of an issue. I mean, look at your, another way of editorializing. You look at our crime statistics. Much of our crimes or the things that law enforcement is sent out to deal with are situations where people cannot get along with one another. That is, and as much as in law enforcement or in policing, we might enforce the law a little bit less than 10% of the time. The rest of the time, what are we doing? We're umpires, we're social workers, we're traffic cops, we're doing all these other
Parked
things.
on corners to make sure people drive slowly.
Exactly. I mean, we're doing all these other things. The reason I say this is because there are certain circumstances where we need to solve the problems for the future so we don't have the issues. And that's in all scenarios. If you can get a mature officer that's been around, understands, they will understand the custodial interference issues, and they'll understand that they are an issue. They need to be an issue because they spawn's not the word, but they do proliferate other situations that may come up in the future where you don't want those kinds of things to happen.
So hopefully
I answered the question
you did.
in a way.
So a quick question. If somebody said, I want to show, I really am getting jerked around on the custodial interference side of things. Let me ask these questions. These are what I would think of. I'm not in that situation, but I would think a certified copy of my court order. Would a police officer find that helpful?
Yes.
And for those of you that don't know what that is, that's one that's been certified by the court as authentic. It's a copy, but it has a red stamp on it showing this came from court so that the police officer knows it's not faked.
Mm-hmm.
And I would assume 1, 2, 3, 4 incidents of that, or, where you're standing there respectfully, you're keeping a safe distance so that your ex can't accuse you of being a stalker or something like that.
It's also a good idea to have a calendar, any emails exchanging and saying this is your weekend, we traded for that weekend, because sometimes the ambiguity of if it's my weekend, but
Yeah.
we traded. You got to have
Yeah.
some.
Your
sort of
officer,
proof.
it's not his weekend. That's why I'm not letting him take the kids, not because I'm committing
We
custodial
actually
offense.
agreed to.
Mhm.
Yeah, you need to show that stuff.
Well, and any other case numbers? Any other case numbers from other agencies, from that agency that they're involved in, that show that, you know, this has been an issue in the past? That will help the officer as well.
My last question on that would be is that I have never been a police officer, so I don't know how this works. But a question I think a lot of people would have, including myself, would be, what's the harm in an officer jangling the cuffs or mentioning, it's like, well, you can either hand the kids over voluntarily, or I can cuff you right here, or I can take out my citation book. It seems to me that would be something I would hope police officers would do more often that I don't see. Is there a reason why that I wouldn't understand?
No, I think that's, I mean, in the psychology of an officer, depending on what kind of personality you get in an officer, depending on what level, you know, the situation has reached. I know personally for me, I think if I'm frustrated, I've seen this situation happen before, I'm at the same spot at the same time, I would have no problem with whipping my book out and going, you know, hey, if you don't calm down, number one, you know, and you if you're not safe and you're gonna threaten me, then I will take my cuffs out. We don't dangle our cuffs.
Yeah, I was
But yeah, I know what
speaking
you're talking about.
figuratively,
Yeah,
yes.
but there is a way, obviously. Yeah, there is a way of verbalizing that in a sense that taking charge, taking command, and saying, look, I'm done with this. I've been here before. We've been here before. If you don't allow this to occur, I'm going to cite you, and we'll screen it with the attorney, and you guys can deal with it in court. And I will do so every time this happens. Nothing wrong with that. And you know what that would do if more officers did that? It would start
deter
to
custodial
deter a little
interference.
bit.
Yeah.
How
Yes.
it actually work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it certainly wouldn't do any harm, and maybe
No,
nothing would change, but at least
exactly.
it'd be worth a shot. So officers, if you're reluctant to do that, I can't speak for Mr. Babka here, but I would ask you, just try it and see what happens. Because if you're tired of being called back again and again, and you got this poor frustrated mom or dad, might be worth considering.
It did actually happen once that
Mhm.
when I was working with APAL, when I started APAL, and I called and thanked the officers because that's all they had to do was say, hey, this law has passed, and it was right on the brink of when the law just came out, and they were aware that the knowledge was kind of heightened, and that's all they did. They just explained the law, and guess what? Everybody got their kids. Everybody went on with their life.
Mhm.
So it frustrates me that it doesn't.
Most
happen like
people,
that.
most
They should
people,
just-
if you say this
Yeah.
is a law, this is the way it is,
Right.
we will enforce it if we have to. If you guys can't get along, children, not children, but you know, children, they'll start to comply. They understand that.
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time
Thanks
to
for
talk to
having
us
me.
about this, and not the same old kind of mamby-pamby stuff that you'll usually hear.
Mhm.
We appreciate you being so upfront with us. Thanks so
Thanks.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming down.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks.